And now, marine weather around Alaska. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan. Let's take a look now at your marine weather forecast for the state of Alaska. And this will take us Sunday into Monday, November 12th and the 13th. Well, as of this Saturday afternoon, we have rather extensive ice forming along the Arctic coast with areas of ice within Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, trying to get a little better established. However, we are going to have a strong frontal system push through. There's a deep low down around 960 millibars tracking across the eastern interior here of Russia. And with this front pushing in on Sunday and passing through the area on Monday, we're going to see southeast gale force winds shift south and then southwesterly, and this could cause some of the ice to shift around. Plus, we're going to have the threat of higher than normal water levels. We're expecting coastal possibility of some minor coastal flooding, lower Yukon Delta, all along Norton Sound and along the southwest side of the Seward Peninsula with those favorable southeast to southwest winds. We're expecting water levels could run 2 to as much as 4 or 5 feet above the normal high tide. So take measures to protect anything you have along, any equipment along the shoreline, such as fish racks and other things that could be disturbed by strong winds and by some higher water levels. Otherwise, here is the map. There's that low center off the Kamchatka coast, going to cut in across eastern Russia up to the west side of the Chukchi Sea. This frontal system will occlude as we get into Sunday. Along it, a little sliver of slightly warmer air could bring a mix of precipitation across the southwest interior from around Bethel to Anvik to the west side of the Alaska Range. Further inland, though, the middle Yukon Valley on up into the central interior, as well as the interior of the Seward Peninsula, east of Kotzebue Sound, and along the southwest side here of the Brooks Range. We have winter storm warnings for 4 to 8 inches of snow. Locally, 12 inches could fall in some areas as a result of favorable upslope flow when you have a wind with any sort of southerly component. And that front will push further inland on Monday, and a secondary low will develop over the northern Gulf. A pretty strong piece of energy coming across Kuskokwim Bay will cross over Cook Inlet, and that's going to provide a burst of heavier snow around Anchorage. Anchorage could get another foot of snow late Sunday night through early mid-afternoon on Monday, with the heaviest snow there falling Monday morning. So once that system kind of busts on by, we continue to see those strong southwesterly winds coming in along the west coast, keeping surf elevated. And further west, there will be another low taking shape just southwest of the western Aleutians, and that'll be the next weather player that works its way east-northeastward and brings additional unsettled stormy weather to areas of the southern, southwest, south central, and areas of the Alaska Peninsula, especially Wednesday into Thursday. In the meantime, Sunday's marine forecast: northwest winds, Lynn Canal 15 knots, waves 2 feet. Stevens Passage winds northeasterly 15 knots, 3-foot waves. And then Dixon Entrance, look for southeast winds to 15 knots, waves 6-7 feet. The outer coast, winds generally east-southeast 10 to 15 knots, waves anywhere from 8 to as high as 12 feet. And on Monday, winds will generally go north-northwest 10 to 15 knots, inner channels with waves running a couple feet, except down toward Dixon Entrance 5 to 6 feet. Outer coast, winds will be turning more southwest and then southeasterly toward a center, that secondary area of low pressure I was telling you going to develop there on Monday afternoon across the northern Gulf. Could see some gusts from the south as high as 40 knots, Cape Suckling, waves 7 to 9 feet. On Sunday, across the northwestern Gulf, relatively quiet, variable winds 10 knots off the Kenai coast, waves 5-6 feet. North winds 10 knots within Prince William Sound, 2-foot waves. Variable winds 10 knots, and then winds pick up northwesterly 30 knots there for lower Cook Inlet and the entrance with waves 6-7 feet. On Monday, with that low center taking shape in this area here, we're going to see north winds Prince William Sound 25 knots, winds westerly 15 knots, upper Cook Inlet, but as high as 40 and 45 knots there at the entrance of Cook Inlet and northeast of Kodiak City with waves 10 to 11 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Sunday, look for west-northwest winds 20 knots. Winds will pick up to 30 knots from the south-southwest as you get down toward Cold Bay and False Pass, with waves down this way building 9 to 10 feet or so. And then for Monday, look for a broad area of westerly winds to 30 knots across Kodiak Island, the upper portion of the Alaska Peninsula, including Bristol Bay. Winds fall off a bit to 20 knots there south of False Pass. Waves 5 to 8 feet on the North Pacific side and generally running around 10 feet on the Bering side. Across the Aleutian chain on Sunday, winds will generally be southwest to west, 30 to 40 knots. Waves running 13 to 18 feet across the eastern central Aleutians, 12 to 16 feet on the North Pacific side. And then for Monday, winds do come down, southwest to south winds 20 knots over the eastern Aleutians. They'll try to turn back around to the southeast in advance of the next low that's still going to be well southwest of the western Aleutians on Monday, though winds will start to pick up 25 to 30 knots there as you go south and west of Kiska. Along the southwest coast, we have the strong front working its way into the west coast. Ahead of it, southeast winds to 40 knots within the broader open waters here of Norton Sound, 30 knots off of the lower Yukon Delta, 35 to 30 knot south-southwest winds from St. Matthew to St. Paul, waves 18 to 23 feet. On Monday, we have southwest winds into Kuskokwim Bay to 30 knots with 9-foot waves, 30-knot winds along the lower Yukon Delta and within areas of Norton Sound with waves generally 8 feet there, 35 to 40 knot southwesterly gales from St. Matthew to St. Paul and St. George with waves of 18 to 22 feet. And on Sunday, we're really going to see some strong gale force winds, 40 to 45 knots from the north side of St. Lawrence through the Bering Strait up through the lower Chukchi Sea, waves 9 to 11 feet. Further north, winds still 30, 35 knots once you get up toward Point Lay on up to Utqiagvik, and then falling off easterly 20 to 25 knots where there is a fair amount of ice in place along areas here of the Arctic coast. And then for Monday, we are expecting winds to have a southerly component along the Arctic coast, 25 to 30 knots. And as we drop down through the Chukchi Sea, look for 30-knot winds, right around 30-knot southerly winds with waves of 7 to 8 feet, and southwesterly winds 30 to 35 knots south of the Bering Strait to the north side of St. Lawrence with waves running as high as 9 to 13 feet. But those of you, especially within Norton Sound, just keep in mind the fact that there is a coastal flood advisory, that water levels running 2 to as much as maybe 4 or 5 feet above the normal high tide. Just make sure you try to safeguard any type of structures there along the immediate coast or any fish racks so you don't lose them to any higher wave action. So everybody just batten down the hatches because we have one of the more notable early season storms to impact the West.